So good morning, everyone. As usual, our ritual is that Monday morning we sit down and we discuss some academics in area of palliative medicine. So this series is going on with all our post MDs who has done MD palliative medicine, and in between there are stalwarts like Dr. Brora will come next week. We will announce it at the end of this lecture also, so that people will not forget. So this time, Bhanu is presenting, Bhanu Moria is presenting how to handle vascular emergency like SVC, superior vena cava obstruction, mesenteric ischemia, and cancer-associated arterial thrombosis. All three problems, very difficult, sometimes very challenging to handle. But Bhanu has really worked hard to prepare this presentation, and you should listen carefully. Before Bhanu starts, I want to introduce Bhanu. Bhanu is our post-MD student, and the best part of Bhanu is Bhanu has come almost from a very remote area of this country, clearing AIMS entrance exam. It is again a challenge. He cleared that AIMS entrance exam. Then living in Delhi with such a different lifestyle, he has adjusted that. And then doing MD palliative medicine, where everything is so challenging, we are all the faculty and the department is so demanding. Demanding in the sense they worked hard. They have to work hard for whole day, and then they have to do a thesis also. And surprisingly, Bhanu has done a very good thesis on end of life care. What exactly happening? We have not done any research in that, but what is happening in AIMS in terms of patients, those who are dying, and results have come really well. So this is not the time to show the results, but this is the time to show that how Bhanu has improved a lot. He has not only improved as a personal in academics, but he has improved his personality and his presentation skills also. So please witness how Bhanu has improved his presentation skills and overall personality. So Bhanu, go ahead, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning, respected faculties and dear colleagues. Today I am presenting vascular emergency part 3, which includes superior vena cava obstruction, mesenteric ischemia, and cancer-associated arterial thrombosis. So starting with superior vena cava obstruction. So starting with anatomy. Superior vena cava situated in anterior mediastinum, upper anterior mediastinum. Superior vena cava formed by right and left brachiocephalic vein. Further, these have tributary subclavian vein, internal jugular vein, and external jugular vein. Internal and external jugular vein drain blood from the head and neck region, while subclavian vein drains blood from the upper limbs. So, superior vena cava obstruction, superior vena cava syndrome defined as any condition that occurs due to obstruction of the superior vena cava. It is first described by William Hunter in a syphilitic aneurysmic aneurysm patient. So, most commonly, superior vena cava obstruction is caused by malignancy. The benign causes of obstruction are granulomatous infection, tuberculosis, syphilis, goiter, aortic aneurysm, fibrosing mediastinitis, thrombus formation secondary to presence of central venous catheter, pacemaker, etc. Among malignancy, small cell lung cancer is responsible for 25 to 35%. Non-small cell lung cancer is responsible for 50%, and lymphoma or 10 to 15%. Overall, these three malignancies are responsible for 95% of the total superior vena cava syndrome caused by the malignancy. If we talk about the individual malignancy, then its incidence amongst small cell lung cancer is 10%, and its incidence in non-small cell lung cancer is 2%. But since incidence of small cell lung cancer is more common, hence superior vena cava obstruction is more commonly caused by non-small cell lung cancer. In spite of their central mediastinal lymphadenopathy of Hodgkin lymphoma is the least cause, while non-Hodgkin lymphoma is the more, that is 10 to 50% cause of the superior vena cava obstruction syndrome. Other solid tumor like mediastinal germ cell tumor, mesothelioma, breast cancer, or breast cancer that is secondary to the mediastinal lymph node, least common cause of the superior vena cava obstruction. So what will happen if superior vena cava obstructed? An obstructed superior vena cava initiate collateral venous return to the heart from the upper half of the body through the four principal pathways. The first is azygous venous system, which includes azygous veins, hemiazygous veins, and connecting intercostal veins. Secondly, inner mammary venous system plus tributaries and secondary communication to the superior and inferior epigastric veins. The long thoracic venous system with its connection to the femoral veins, thirdly, and fourth through the vertebral veins. So why superior vena cava is vulnerable to obstruction? Because its location and anatomy. Superior vena cava is surrounded by mediastinum, sternum, right main bronchus, and lymph nodes. Its physiological width is 1.5 to 2 centimeter, and it is thin-walled, compliant, and easily compressible veins. Or it is encircled by a chain of lymph nodes that drain thoracic cavity. So that's why superior vena cava is more vulnerable to obstruction. So coming to pathophysiology, superior vena cava obstruction either obstructed either due to extraluminal compression or due to intraluminal tumor, for example, intravascular lymphoma, or due to vessel wall infiltration. So onset of symptom depends on rapidity of obstruction. In benign cases, there is more insidious onset, while in malignant cases, it is more rapidly increasing obstruction. So what will happen if superior vena cava obstructed? Blood flow from the head and neck region and upper limb obstructed, and there is increased venous pressure in subclavian, jugular, and axillary venous system. By the time collaterals are developed and superior blood flow to the heart is returned through the collaterals, as I described in earlier slide, that is hemiazygous venous system, internal mammary, and epigastric and vertebral venous system. But in spite of their return to collaterals through the collaterals, high central venous pressure remain elevated in the superior vena cava, or this causes specific sign and symptoms of superior vena cava obstruction. So there is, if obstruction, there is less blood return, then there is blood stasis in upper limb and head and neck region. This causes hemodynamic compromise. So hemodynamic compromise, due to hemodynamic compromise, it causes facial edema, distended neck and chest vein, arm edema, facial plethora, visual disturbances, and hypotension. It causes laryngeal edema that leads to stridor, dyspnea, cough, hoarseness, and stridor. And in neurological compromise, it causes cerebral edema, causes syncope, headache, dizziness, confusion, and pudendation. There is facial edema with orbital swelling, cyanosis, distended neck and chest veins, and facial congestions. So there is U classification of clinical grading of superior vena cava syndrome. It also helps in deciding in clinical management of the superior vena cava syndrome. So grade 1, grade 0 is the asymptomatic, its incidence is 10%. That is, there is radiographic evidence of superior vena cava obstruction in absence of sign and symptoms. Grade 1 is mild, that is, its incidence is 25%. There is edema of head and neck, vascular distension, sinuses, and plethora. Grade 2 is moderate, its incidence is 50%. There is edema of head and neck with functional impairment, like mild dysphagia of mild and moderate impairment of head and jaw, and or eyelid movement. Visual disturbances due to eyelid edema. So most of incidents of superior vena cava in mild to moderate cases. Less common was grade 3 severe, that is 10% incidence. In it, there is mild to moderate cerebral edema, headache and dizziness, patient complaint, headache and dizziness, or mild to moderate laryngeal edema or diminished cardiac pressures. There may be syncope after bending. Grade 4 is life-threatening. Incidence is 5%. There is substantial cerebral edema present with confusion, uptone tendency, or substantial laryngeal edema present with stridor, or substantial hemodynamic compromise. Patient present with syncope without precipitating factor like hypotension, renal insufficiency. Grade 5 is fatal, less than 1% incidence, and that is it. So grade 3, 4, and 5 required urgent stent and thrombolysis. Grade 0, 1, 2 is mild. I will discuss further its management in next slide. So on physical examination finding, there is mental changes, cyanosis, papillary edema, facial edema, plethora, venous distension of neck and chest wall, and upper extremity edema. These are physical finding in superior vena cava obstruction syndrome. A normal chest X-ray does not exclude a superior vena cava obstruction. In chest X-ray, there is mediastinal widening. There may be mediastinal widening. There may be pleural effusion and right hilar lymph nodes. Ultrasound cannot be directly imaged due to lack of acoustic window, but patency can be determined with normal waveform in brachiocephalic and subclavian veins. So the exclusion of thrombus in upper extremity, axillary vein, and subclavian veins done by ultrasound. CT scan is the preferred choice. And with IV contrast, it defines the level of obstruction. It maps out collateral pathways. It can identify underlying cause of the obstruction. So bilateral venography is superior to the CT scan, but it does not define the cause unless thrombosis is the solely responsible for the obstruction. But it superior to define the site of obstruction in comparison to CT scan. Magnetic resonance venography useful in patients who have IV contrast allergy or chronic renal failure. So there is radiological stages of superior vena cava obstruction, that is DOTS and Stanford classification system. It is also called anatomical classification system. In Stanford type 1, the obstruction of superior vena cava is less than 90%, low grade. Type 2 Stanford type 2 is the high grade, that is obstruction 90 to 100% of the superior vena cava. In type 3, there is complete obstruction with venous returns through the collaterals, but not memory and epigastric veins. In type 4, there is complete obstruction plus with venous return to heart with collaterals, with it also have internal memory veins and superior and inferior epigastric venous returns. So goal of management is to relieve the symptoms, attempt cure of primary malignant process, in particular elevation of head of the bed to reduce hydrostatic pressure and thereby the edema. Start moderate oxygen to maintain saturation of oxygen more than 90%. Diuretics to reduce cerebral edema. Glucocorticoids to reduce tumor burden and thereby relieve the symptoms of superior vena cava syndrome. Avoid IV line in upper limb if there is marked compromise is present. So as I discussed in U classification, most of the malignant superior vena cava syndrome present in grade 1-2. So it is not potentially life-threatening. Medical emergency required immediate RT. Hence, emergency RT is no longer considered necessary for most of the patients. So treatment depends on severity of disease, etiology, and prognosis. And it is also important to histological diagnosis prior to starting therapy. Like if there is thymoma or thymic tumor, then it is surgically resectable. In case of lung cancer, CT RT is the definitive treatment in early stage, and in late stage, palliative RT. In case of lymphoma, corticosteroid is the mainstay of treatment. So, in superior vena cava obstruction syndrome, upright sitting position, oxygen trial to maintain oxygen saturation more than 90%, or if there is, if family or patient anxious or are requesting. If patient is anxious or agitated, then low dose morphine or midazolam to maintain calmness and reduce anxiety. Dexamethasone 60 milligram IV stat followed by 8 milligram IV BD. Stop if there is no improvement in 5 days, or gradual tapering in those if it is beneficial. Furosemide 40 milligram per oral or IV, then as needed, and stop after 3 days if there is no improvement of symptoms. So, coming to next topic, mesenteric ischemia. So, blood supply of small and large intestine is through the celiac artery, superior mesenteric artery, and inferior mesenteric artery. Celiac mesenteric artery supply stomach, liver, spleen, and pancreas. But it also forms the collateral to small intestine if there is reduced blood flow through the superior mesenteric artery. So superior mesenteric artery gives rise to pancreatoduodenal artery, jejunal arteries, and ileal artery, and ileocolic artery, right colic artery, middle colic artery. It's supplied to jejunum through the jejunal branch, through the ileum through the ileal artery, and it's supplied through the terminal part of the ileum, cecum, and proximal part of the ascending colon through the ileocolic artery, right colic artery, and middle colic artery. Venous return to the venous runs parallel to their arterial supply. So, superior mesenteric veins drains blood through the jejunum through the jejunal veins, through the ileum through the ileal veins, and through the terminal part of the ileum, cecum, and ascending colon through the ileocolic vein, right colic vein, and mesenteric colic vein. It joins to the splenic veins to form the portal veins. So, intestinal ischemia occurs when there is reduction in blood flow to the intestine. So, if the ischemia is to the small intestine, then it is referred to the mesenteric ischemia. If ischemia occurs in large intestine, it is referred as colonic ischemia. If ischemia is there is a broader term, splanchnic ischemia. That is, ischemia involves small intestine as well as any of the abdominal organ like liver, pancreas, kidney, etc. So, most mesenteric ischemia most commonly caused by due to mesenteric arterial embolism, 50% cases, mesenteric arterial thrombosis, mesenteric venous thrombosis, and non-oncologic mesenteric ischemia due to hypoperfusion. Mesenteric arterial embolism occurs due to dislodged clots from the left atria or left ventricle, aortic valve, or proximal part of the aorta. Mesenteric arterial thrombosis mostly occurs in the pre-existing atherosclerotic mesenteric artery. Mesenteric venous thrombosis is idiopathic, or it occurs in hypercoagulable state, for example, malignancy. Mesenteric arterial thrombosis also occur in abdominal trauma or abdominal surgery. Non-oncologic mesenteric ischemia occurs due to intestinal hypoperfusion. It can be either due to low blood flow in case of hypovolemia, hemodialysis, or in cardiac insufficiency. So acute insufficiency of mesenteric arterial blood flow accounts for 60 to 70% of the mesenteric ischemia. The remainder is related to the chronic mesenteric and colonic ischemia. So cardiac diseases like ventricular arrhythmia can cause thrombus disloss and cause mesenteric arterial embolism. During aortic surgery or instrumentation, there is a chance of atheroembolic events occurs. Peripheral arterial disease in pre-existing atherosclerosis in superior mesenteric artery can cause mesenteric arterial thrombosis and cause mesenteric ischemia. Hemodialysis, vasoconstriction medication, hypovolemia, and these causes reduce blood flow to the mesenteric circulation and can cause non-occlusive mesenteric ischemia. There is also cause hereditary thrombotic conditions and inflammatory infection can cause mesenteric ischemia. So, prior embolic events present in around approximately 1/3 of the patients with acute embolic mesenteric ischemia. A personal history of family history of deep vein thrombosis or pulmonary embolism present in approximately half of the patient with acute venous thrombosis. In case of chronic mesenteric ischemia, pain is intermittent, postprandial abdominal pain and aversion to eating, and unintentional weight loss occurs. So, abdominal pain is the most common presenting complaints. And abdominal pain is out of proportion to the physical examination in case of mesenteric ischemia. So, abdominal pain in case of superior mesenteric artery embolism is sudden, severe, periumbilical, and often accompanied by nausea and vomiting. And it is worsened by worsened by eating. That is worsened postprandial pain. Pain in mesenteric venous thrombosis. It is insidious in onset that can wax and wane for a period of time before diagnosis is established. In non-occlusive mesenteric ischemia, the severity and location of abdominal pain is more variable. Symptoms may be overshadowed by precipitating disorder, including hypotension, heart failure, hypovolemia, and cardiac arrhythmia addition. So, features there is some difference in acute small bowel ischemia and acute chronic ischemia. In case of acute small bowel ischemia, age varies with etiology of ischemia. In acute colonic ischemia, 90% of patients is over the age of 60 years. In small bowel, there is acute precipitating cause is typical, while acute precipitating cause is rare. In chronic ischemia, patient appears severely in small bowel, while patient do not appear severely in colonic ischemia. Pain is usually severe, tenderness is not common clearly, while in colonic ischemia, mild abdominal pain and tenderness present. Bleeding is uncommon or until very late, while in colonic ischemia, bleeding is early. MR angiography and multi-detector CT angiography may be considered as the initial diagnostic test in case of small bowel ischemia. And angiography is recommended if there is a strong clinical suspicion. While in case of colonic ischemia, colonoscopy is the preferred choice. So, in physical examination, abdominal examination initially may be normal. Also, only mild abdominal distension with no peritoneal signs of inflammation, such as rebound, tenderness, or GERD. There may be occult blood present in the stool. However, as the bowel ischemia progresses and transmural bowel infarction develops, the abdominal becomes grossly distended, bowel sound becomes absent, and peritoneal signs develops. A feculent odor to the bread may be appreciated. In case of small ischemia, ischemic mesentery, sign consistent with dehydration and shock indicates deteriorating clinical course. There is no specific blood investigation for mesenteric ischemia, but there is marked lymphocytosis with predominance of immature cell, white blood cell present in mesenteric ischemia. There is an elevation of hematocrit consistent with hemoconcentration and metabolic acidosis present. And lactate for acute mesenteric ischemia have 86% sensitivity and 44% specificity. And elevated serum amylase level in approximately half of the patient with intestinal ischemia. There is elevated phosphate levels in 80% of cases. If normal D-dimer level may help to exclude intestinal ischemia, but elevated or less useful for making a diagnosis of intestinal ischemia. So 25% of plain radiograph are normal in case of mesenteric ischemia. Here is in plain radiograph there is a collection of airs within the wall. There is a pneumatosis intestinalis is the finding and distension of the wall. So first pic showing plain radiograph showing a thickening of the bowel wall. While this is the magnified image of the bowel wall showing air within the wall. This is pneumatosis intestinalis, and a third image also showing air within the bowel wall. In CT scan, this is magnified view showing air within the wall. This is coronal section. This is cross section. All this showing collection of air within the wall or collection of air inside the wall. So there is a multiple emboli in superior mesenteric artery in arteriography. This is the branch of superior mesenteric artery showing multiple emboli in arteriography. This is magnified image showing embolus in the within the artery. So initial management of mesenteric ischemia is gastrointestinal decompression, fluid resuscitation, hemodynamic monitoring and support, correction of the electrolyte and abnormality, pain control through the parenteral opioids, for example, through the fentanyl, morphine, anticoagulation under most circumstances, and initiation of broad-spectrum antibiotics. So, ischemia develops due to severe hypoperfusion, leading to the transmural necrosis of bowel wall, which can progress to sepsis, peritonitis, and intra-abdominal air or extensive gangrene. So surgery should not be delayed in patient if there is suspected or having intestinal infection or perforation based upon clinical, radiographic, or laboratory parameters, regardless of etiology. For a patient with non-occlusive mesenteric ischemia, surgical exploration should be limited to the patient with peritoneal signs. So this is diagram of laparotomy showing image of laparotomy showing mesenteric dusky dysplasia of acute onset of mesenteric ischemia. This is showing necrosed bowel wall. So treatment of mesenteric ischemia depends upon the treatment of specific etiology. In case of mesenteric occlusion, the treatment is early exploration of abdomen with surgical embolectomy, and also intravascular infusion of thrombolytic drugs in case of if there is multiple comorbidity present. In case of mesenteric venous thrombosis, if there is no peritoneal signs, then systemic anticoagulation is the treatment of choice. While if there is a present peritoneal signs, then immediate laparotomy. In case of non-occlusive mesenteric ischemia, treatment is the insisting cause like hypovolemia, cardiac insufficiency, etc. So coming to the cancer-associated arterial thrombosis. So cancer is the nowadays there is a serious condition of arterial thrombosis occurs in cancer and patient due to cancer and its treatment. Cancer is associated with hypercoagulable stress and patient with cancer experience high burden of thromboembolic disease. Arterial thromboembolic events are associated with increased mortality even after matching of all factors and stages of the cancer. The venous thromboembolic embolism is more common than arterial thromboembolic event. The incidence of arterial thromboembolic events at 6 months was 4.7% in all cancer patients, compared to 2.2% in best control cohort. Arterial thrombosis also depends upon types of the cancer. Patient with lung, gastric, or pancreatic cancer had highest rate of arterial thrombotic embolic events. So there is multiple risk factor. There is interaction of multiple risk factor for development of arterial thrombosis. So patient-related risk factors includes age, like older age, more be having atherosclerosis, smoking, history of previous thrombosis, obesity, and cardiovascular risk factor. This increases risk of arterial thrombosis. Disease-related risk factor involves cancer-associated hypercoagulability, types of cancer, as I discussed in previous slides, and also the type of and extent of the disease. Treatment-related risk factor are those targeting vascular endothelial growth factor and tyrosine kinase inhibitor. Also, the platinum-based agent, fluoroquinolones, BCR-ABL tyrosine kinase inhibitors, immunomodulator, tamoxifen, erythropoietin, and radiotherapy. So, a classical concept of vascular thrombosis, that is Virchow's triad. It works in both arterial thrombosis as well as venous thrombosis. So there is three factors for development of thrombosis: endothelial injury, stasis of blood flow, and hypercoagulability. In cancer patient, endothelial injury occurs due to ischemia, heart, drug, or chemotherapeutic drug, as I discussed, and radiation therapy itself can cause endothelial damage. Stasis of blood flow occur due to vascular compression or infiltration by tumor mass, endonuclear tumor growth, or blood hyperviscosity due to erythrocytosis, leukocytosis. There may be less blood flow, as I discussed in the supramesenteric artery than into portal venous system. If there is portal venous hypertension, then also there is stasis to blood flow. Dehydration and prolonged immobility and older age also causes stasis to blood flow. The tumor secretes a multiple procoagulant factor, circulating tumor cells, exhibiting procoagulants, high platelets, drugs, and intravenous devices, and older age. All these activate clotting system and cause arterial thrombosis. So, how platelet activated by tumor cells. Tumor cells express multiple procoagulant factor, tissue factor, protoplanin, and plasminogen activator inhibitor, factor 1. Plasminogen activator inhibitor inhibits fibrinolysis, hence it inhibits clot dissolution. It also secretes clotting procoagulants, which directly activates factor 10, and tissue factor and protoplanin activates C-type lectin-like receptor type 2 present on the platelets and activates platelets to cause activate clotting system and cause clottings. Multiple procoagulants secreted by tumor, that is microparticles exosome. It also secretes some agonist to the P2Y12 receptor present on the platelets, that is tissue factor, ADP, thrombin. These protoplanin exosomes, tissue factor, thrombin activates expression of the P2Y12 on platelets, and also protease activator receptor 1 and 4 present on the platelets, and activating the clotting system and leading to formation of clot. So there is hypoxia, two hypoxia induce the derived factor, platelet derived growth factor, and vascular endothelial growth factor. Platelet derived growth factors binds to the platelet derived growth factor receptors, and vascular endothelial growth factor binds to the vascular endothelial growth factor receptor, and it is responsible for cell survival, angiogenesis, prostaglandin production, and nitric oxide production. So most of the cancer, some of the cancer treatment chemotherapeutic agent target to these factors and receptors. Like bevacizumab is anti-endothelial vascular endothelial growth factor, aflibercept and ramucirumab. This target to this factor, and there is tyrosine kinase inhibitor that target to this receptor like sunitinib, sorafenib, and hence they causes cell injury and injury to endothelium, and it is saw that there is more incidence of cardiovascular diseases and thrombosis in patients with who are receiving treatment with these agents. So, diagnosis of arterial thrombosis depends upon the involvement of affected organs. It presents with chest pains in case of coronary arterial disease. It presents with limb pain in case of peripheral arterial disease, and it presents with neurological deficit in case of stroke. So, coronary arterial disease, classical definition of mesenteric ischemia type 1 includes chest pain, ECG changes, and abnormal cardiac biomarker caused by arterial thrombosis, usually in setting of atherosclerotic disease. Type 2 is defined as myocardial infarction secondary to the ischemia due to either increased oxygen demand or decreased supply, such as coronary spasm, hypotension, anemia, and coronary embolism. Type 2 MIs represent a significant proportion of acute coronary syndrome events in cancer patients. It can be difficult to clinically distinguish between two types of MI, and therefore non-invasive functional testing or invasive coronary angiography may be indicates in this scenario. Peripheral arterial disease, there is classical 6P signs and symptoms of peripheral arterial disease, that is pain, pallor, pulselessness, poikilothermia, paresthesia, and paresthesia. There is also ankle brachial index to define the limb ischemia. So, classification of acute limb ischemia, it includes viable, marginally threatened 2A, immediately threatened 2B, and non-viable 3. So, pain in type 1 is mild, while in type 2A is moderate, while type 2B is severe, and in type 3 is variable. Capillary fill is intact in type 1, while delayed in type 2 and type 2B, while absent in type 3. Motor deficit is none in case of type 1 and 2A, while partial in case of 2B, and complete paralysis occur in type 3. Sensory deficit is none in type 1, none or minimal only involved 2 in type 2A, more than the 2 in type 2B, and complete anesthetic in type 3. Trail Doppler audible in type 1, inaudible in type 2A, type 2B, and type 3. Venous Doppler audible in type 1 and type 2A and type 2B, while inaudible in type 3. The treatment of type A1 is urgent evaluation, type 2A is urgent revascularization, type 2B is emergency revascularization, and type 3 is amputation. So, invasive angiography is often considered since it can quickly diagnose an occlusive thrombus and enable to revascularization. In non-emergent cases, when diagnosis is unclear, Non-invasive imaging such as CT angiography, MR angiography is often appropriate. So, antiplatelet agents are the central to the treatment of arterial thrombosis in both patient with or without cancer. So, careful consideration about the bleeding risk is needed because cancer patients are already in thrombocytopenia. So, Society of Cardiovascular Angiography and Intervention recommends that aspirin can be given if even platelet count is more than 10,000, and dual antiplatelet therapy with aspirin and clopidogrel is reasonable for platelet count between 30 to 50,000. Other P2Y12 receptor inhibitors such as ticagrelor and prasugrel, which have higher bleeding rates, should be generally avoided when there is a platelet count below the 50,000. A more conservative approach are advised against all antiplatelet agent and percutaneous coronary intervention in patient with platelet count less than 50,000. Revascularization includes thrombectomy, as in case of peripheral artery disease or stroke, percutaneous coronary artery intervention, bypass surgery, and percutaneous peripheral angioplasty in case of MI. There is no platelet count limit for diagnosis heart recatheterization. There is sevenfold increased risk of stent thrombosis in cancer patients who had undergone bare metal stent. And cytotoxic and cytostatic chemotherapeutic drug impair stent endothelization. They affect the ingrowth of both surrounding endothelial cells and circulating progenitor cells. Hence, circulating progenitor cells are the main source of endothelization of stent, and patients with stent thrombosis have lower endothelial progenitor colony and forming unit capacity. So the endothelial and circulating progenitor cells are suppressed in cancer patients, especially in patient receiving treatment with vascular endothelial factor inhibitors. So obstruction of superior vena cava is the source of morbidity and mortality in the cancer population. Not all the superior vena cava obstruction present in a severe condition, mostly present in grade 1 and 2. Hence, proper diagnosis prior to starting the therapy. In case of serious, there is immediate stenting and stenting should be done. Treatment of specific etiology should be considered in case of mesenteric ischemia. If there is present peritoneal sign, then immediate laparotomy should be done. Consideration of symptom severity, underlying etiology, prognosis, fibromyalgia, and ability to tolerate chemoradiation. In case of acute arterial thrombosis, in presence of malignancy, there is a very bleak prognosis, and outcome from the surgery are poor. So, careful consideration of palliative care may be appropriate as arterial thrombosis is an element in the many cancer patients. Thank you. Thank you.
So, Arun, thank you, Banu.
Thank you, ma'am.
Banu, although we understand that superior vena cava and arterial thrombosis, these are really very self-explanatory phenomena. There is hardly any investigations required to diagnose these conditions. But still, as a palliative medicine physician, we should know medicine behind it, and we should know how to systematically investigate these patients. And Banu has tried his level best to summarize everything systematically. Arun, any questions? Please go ahead with the question and comments.
Yeah, thank you. Manu, nice presentation. Everybody is.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, everybody has put down comments that Manu, good presentation, nice presentation. But there is one, there is just a comment, Manu, not that you have to answer it. So sometimes when people have vena cava obstruction, they might not be able to lie down.
Yes, ma'am.
So sometimes it is useful to do a clinical diagnosis rather than doing some kind of investigation. But of course, if after giving steroid and giving preliminary treatment, the patient feels better if they can lie down. I am sure that investigations are helpful in understanding the exact location of obstruction or radiation site for vena cava obstruction. So that is okay. Other than that, Bhanu, there are no questions for today at this point of time. But there are many congratulatory comments. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, sir, and thank you to all who congratulates. Well,
Yeah, if someone has any question, I think this is a good time that you can please ask Bhanu yourself, because we have some little bit of time left. You can please ask, unmute yourself and please ask Bhanu if you have any question for today. Thanks.
So the comment which Dr. Meenakshi has sent, that it is self-explanatory. As I said, there are conditions which are clinically we can find out that these are SVC, or this is a case of SVC obstruction and this is arterial thrombosis. In mesenteric ischemia, sometimes we need to investigate. But in SVC obstruction, it is important because we have seen many, you all must have seen that there are many conditions which are completely curable. So if something is getting compressed from outside and we can remove it immediately, or in lymphoma patient, it is important to investigate these patients in certain condition as well. So I think this is a very good seminar, Bhanu. Very nice presentation. Bhanu has worked really hard. I think since the day he knew that he is going to present, he is preparing his slides. So thank you, Bhanu. And before people start logging out, I just want to announce again that don't forget to log in next week. I always keep telling in every lecture that we should know medicine behind the palliative medicine, and without learning medicine behind the palliative medicine, whatever we are doing is incomplete. Now, Dr. Brora will tell you what is the science behind integration of palliative medicine, because we keep saying that palliative medicine should be integrated right from the beginning. But what exactly the science behind it? How we can do it? What are the challenges? How we can overcome those challenges? Everything, Dr. Brora. And I don't think that we are very fortunate and very lucky that he has accepted our request. So please don't forget to log in next week, 6:30. He is going to tell you what is the science behind integration of palliative medicine in continuum of care.